This video will be talking a lot about Spanish because that is the language that I'm learning, and I'll be talking about my personal experience, but the tips in this video can help you no matter what your target language is if you feel like you're stuck in the intermediate slump. So why do we get stuck in the intermediate slump in the first place? When you're learning a language, typically you learn the most high frequent usage words at the beginning, and then as you advance, you have to learn a lot more words to see the same kind of progress that you're used to seeing in the beginning. There's actually a scientific law about this called Zipf's law, which states that the most frequently occurring words in any language make up about 90% of the contents. For example, if you're reading a book in English, these super high frequency words like an, of, the, he, things like that are going to make up about 90% of the sentences that you read. So when you're learning a language, you learn all of these super high frequency words, the first 2,000 or so words at the beginning. So then when you're reading, listening, you're going to understand about 90%, but then there's that 10% that you still don't understand. And that 10% will be the more specific information that you need to understand what you're reading or what you're hearing. Typically, that's the second 2,000 words that you learn. That means that it takes more effort. You have to learn less common, more specific words to see the same kind of progress that you're used to seeing in the beginning. Basically, this law explains more or less why the intermediate slump happens, so just don't let it discourage you. It's something that's totally natural in the language learning process. It just means that you have to mix things up, try to do something different to make sure you're still gaining new vocabulary and continue advancing. So with that said, here are my tips. Tip number 1, make sure that you're actually using the language and not just studying. I think it can be easy to get stuck in this pattern of just always studying the language, so whether that's studying new words in Anki or doing grammar drills, things like that. But in order to continue advancing once you're at an intermediate level, you have to make sure that you're still using the language. So that's reading, writing, speaking, and listening. You have to make sure that you're doing all of those or else you won't really be able to advance. Tip number 2 is to pretend that you're a native speaker. What do I mean by that? Well, basically, do whatever you would do in your normal life, your daily activities that you always do, but do them in your target language. So if you're learning Spanish, whatever you do normally, like if you keep like a daily to-do list, if you write in a journal, if you're even looking up recipes to make for dinner, all of these things you should be doing in Spanish. For example, if you're looking up a recipe for dinner, you look it up in Spanish. Every time you come across a word you don't know, just look it up and learn the meaning in that moment. All of these words you come across will be words that are missing from your vocabulary anyways. Do this with everything that you can. Everything that you can possibly do in Spanish, you should try to do it in Spanish. Tip number 3, identify your problem areas and work on them. So when you're in the intermediate phase, it can be really easy to not confront the things that are challenging for you about the language because you've already reached a point where you can have conversations and be perfectly understood, even if your grammar isn't perfect. But I recommend instead of just avoiding these issues that you have, try to confront them directly. So if you notice, every time I'm speaking Spanish and I have to express myself about this or that or use this grammatical construction and I just can't do it, make a list of those things and then try to understand them. So you can watch videos explaining them, read a grammar book that talks about this topic in particular, or book a class with a tutor specifically to work on these issues. There's a lot of resources out there for things like this, podcasts that talk about grammar, videos, places you can take lessons with native Spanish speakers. A lot of those resources I mentioned in my first video, but today I'm going to introduce you guys to another resource that I've found really useful lately, which is Mextalki. So Efra and Diego are going to tell you guys a little bit about Mextalki.
Hey Meredith, well, it's nice to see you recording here. It was actually a surprise, but
what a casualty.
Well, anyways, thank you, and that's correct. Mextalki is a website where you can find many things such as one-on-one lessons where we tailor each lesson according to your specific needs. Then we also offer a conversation club 5 times per week where in each session we have a different topic. For example, last week we talked about the environment and also friendship. And on top of that, we offer podcasts.
About the podcast, you can also find a glossary with many expressions. You will also have a transcript, and the best of it is that you can find all of this in one website.
All of this.
Including Meredith.
So I've been using Mextalki for a while now, and I have joined the conversation classes as well as seen some of the videos. I've been living in Mexico now for about 7 or 8 months, so of course I've picked up a lot of Mexican slang, but every time I see the videos and podcasts on Mextalki, I learn something new that I had never heard before. Mextalki has a ton of resources available for free, like their podcasts and videos, but to get the most out of it, you should subscribe, and that way you'll have access to the conversation practice every week, as well as one-on-one lessons and the transcripts and quizzes for all of the podcasts and videos. If you're interested in trying Mextalki out, you can sign up with the link in the description, which will give you 1 hour of a free one-on-one lesson and 1 seat to attend a conversation practice. Well, Ifra, Diego, thank you for joining me to explain what Mextalki has to offer. And then someone runs by.
Well, gracias por tenernos aquí, Meredith. Nos vamos.
Okay, tip number 4, switch to active learning. So when you reach the intermediate phase, I think a lot of the times we get stuck in passive learning, because at this point you can enjoy the language. You can watch TV shows in Spanish, you can listen to podcasts in Spanish, you can have conversations and talk in Spanish. But if you're stuck in this slump where you're not seeing any more progress, take that habit of passive learning and switch back to active learning. For example, if part of your Spanish practice is watching Netflix in Spanish, that's something typically that you do passively. So a way that you can change that is, instead of just watching the show, watch the show, and every time you come across a new word or expression that you don't understand or don't know, pause it, write it down, and then later when you're studying, you can review these new words and expressions, look them up, try to understand what they mean, and then create some example sentences so that it sticks with you. For example, myself, like most Spanish learners, I usually get pretty stuck with the subjunctive. So anytime in a TV show, in a podcast, or even in my real life, anytime I hear someone use the subjunctive in a way that I don't quite understand or that I wouldn't use it myself, I usually write it down, and then later I review these things on my own, try to understand why the subjunctive was needed, and then I go a step further and create my own example sentences using this structure so that I just drill it into my head and it starts to feel natural for me. Tip number 5 is try to think in Spanish. If this isn't something that you're already doing, you should definitely start. I think it's been a major key in my progress in Spanish. So whatever you're doing, try to make yourself do it in Spanish. So your internal dialogue, the imaginary conversations that you have in your head, the way you narrate your day to yourself. Try to do all of these things, but in Spanish. So if you're going out the door, you're running late, and you think to yourself, oh, I hope I make it in time, do this, but in Spanish. As you do this, you'll uncover all of the holes in your grammar and your vocabulary. When you come across something and say, I can't think that in Spanish because I don't know how to say it, then you look it up and learn those new words and phrases. You'll also improve your ability to keep your brain in Spanish mode, something that I find kind of hard when I switch between teaching English during the day and then speaking Spanish in the afternoons with people around me. Sometimes it's kind of hard to make that transition. So if you're only practicing being in Spanish mode when you're talking with someone, having conversation practice, a way to break out of that is to practice thinking in Spanish. My final tip is to remember that there's no hurry. Enjoy the process. I'm going to read a quote by Steve Kaufman, which is called The Language Learner's Manifesto. And this really resonated with me, and I think is part of the key of how I've stayed committed to learning Spanish even though it's been more than 2 years. Every day is a learning day. Every day the language is entering my brain. I enjoy reading and listening every day. I study with energy and enthusiasm. I study interesting things and enjoy the language. If I enjoy the language, I will improve. I will let the language enter my mind. There's no need to push myself. I'm getting better every day. When I saw this quote, it resonated with me a lot because I feel like that has been, as I said before, the key to me staying motivated in Spanish is because I've never treated it as a task, as a duty, as some kind of obligation. I never looked ahead like, oh, if I study 3 hours per day for X number of days, then I'll be fluent in 1 year, or these kind of calculations. It's just something that I do because I enjoy doing it, even if I'm not at fluency yet. This is something that I tell my students of English all the time. I think it's more important to develop this habit of enjoying the process of language learning than it is to have some kind of rigid regimen trying to get to fluency as quickly as you possibly can. If you develop a genuine love for the language, then the fluency will come naturally because you'll continue to work on the language every day and it won't feel like work. It creates a cycle. The more genuine enjoyment you feel in the language learning process, the more that you will seek it out instead of avoid it. The happier you are, the more you understand. And the more you understand, the happier you are. Pues estos son todos mis consejos, son cosas que me han ayudado mucho a mí para seguir avanzando en mi progreso con el español. Espero que también les sirvan a ustedes. Y pues todo. Muchas gracias por escucharme y por verme y suscríbete a mi canal y nos vemos en el próximo video.